start. Linda, recording's in progress. Okay, Linda, do you want to tell us how long you've been a Touchstone member, when you started making art, what inspires you?
Okay. I joined Touchstone in 2010 when when Touchstone moved to the current location, which is on New York Avenue, and they were looking for extra members. So I applied, and luckily I got in, and I've been here ever since. It's a fantastic place to show your art, and it's got a great community as well. And over the years, I've participated in various committees and so on and so forth. So I know Touchstone pretty well, and I'm very familiar with it. Now, as for my personal journey, I was a fine arts major during my college years, and after that, did graduate work to get an MAT so I could teach, but I never have actually taught. That was kind of like a backup plan if things really went wrong. So anyway, and I got into abstraction during that time, really during graduate school. Um, and then I took off quite a few years to raise kids and renovate a house. Um, and around 1985, 1990, in those years, I came back to art full time. No, not really full time, but in a serious manner. And at that time, I started taking classes at the Torpedo Factory here in Alexandria. And I stayed in those classes for 30 years. Actually, I stayed in one particular class, which was in abstract art, for 30 years. And I did learn how to make abstract art. And in fact, that class was really the thing that was responsible for making me the artist I am today. So I don't know. Anything else?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Amy, you want to do your thing?
Sure. I've been a member of Touchstone since 2015. I was juried in then. At the time, I was primarily painting watercolor. Um, Before I get to that, though, I've been making art my entire life, although my career was in journalism and the law, but I was an art history major in college. I grew up in the Manhattan area. My father loved art and would take us to museums. And there was no piece of paper around my house when I was a child that was safe if I had a pencil or a crayon. I just always doodled, always made art. And even when I was working, raising a family, I kept trying to make art when I had time. When I became an empty nester and got closer to retirement, I started ratcheting up my art activities, taking workshops, and refreshed my drawing skills with it. I went back and took a basic drawing class, and I was primarily a watercolorist, painting landscapes, representational work, not the usual frou-frou watercolor, but I did master that technique, as difficult as some people say it is. But I became frustrated with it. I wanted more freedom. I didn't find the process fun after a while. And during the pandemic, I started taking online classes on how to make abstract art, and that's basically what I've been doing ever since.
Ah, great. Thanks, Amy. Connie?
We'll be here. Only been in the gallery maybe for 2.5 years. Um, and I don't have an art a history of doing art really. I started out doing anthropology and sociology and teaching, but I was always interested in art. I did take art history courses and probably liked them better than anything else I took. And it was always in the back of my mind that at some point I was going to really take some art classes. And there was a watercolor class in just a local community center near my house at one point. And when I saw that, I thought, okay, I'll jump in and I'll do this. And it turned out to be a group of people who had been meeting for years, and they were really accomplished and good. But they were so kind to me. They took me in with no experience and helped me learn, how to do basic watercolor and to work with it and encourage me along. And like Amy, I did watercolor for quite a while and all different types, and also grew impatient. I didn't want to leave whites and wanted to be able to paint over things. It began to feel kind of prissy to me. So I'd always wanted really to do some kind of abstract art. I love the abstract expressionists, and I really wanted to do something more like that. So I too went to somebody at the Art League and started taking abstract classes at the Art League, and also at the Corcoran with Steve Kushner. And so bit by bit learned, how to do abstract art, and got really fascinated also with the water media artists that were very busy at the time. This was like a good 25 years ago. And we can talk about it at some point. So I'm doing it.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's see some of your work. And Amy, I'm going to ask you to start, and you're going to share your screen.
Yes. Hold on.
Okay.
All right. So this is my presentation. I frequently get asked the following questions about my art. So I thought I'd try to weave in the answers to these questions. Why abstract? I've kind of touched on that a little bit already. What inspires me? How do I know where to start? What's my technique or process? And how did I find my style? So as I go through these works, I'm going to show you, I'm going to try to address those 4 questions. Why abstract? I touched on, I wanted the freedom to enjoy the process with watercolor. I love watercolor, but it was just the process was so painstaking. I didn't feel like I could be really expressive. And as to what inspires me, I'm primarily inspired by color. And I put this painting up first. It's called The Fun Stuff because this was actually one of the easiest paintings I ever painted. It just kind of, I did a little sketch in my sketchbook, and then I fooled around with these colors on an art program on my iPad, and went from there. And this is the finished product, and it happened very quickly. It doesn't always work like that. So when I said I'm primarily inspired by color, I want to show you actually the work of another artist, Rufino Tamayo. I volunteer as a docent at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and they had an exhibit of his work. He's a Mexican artist, late Mexican artist. And I can't say that I necessarily liked his subject matter, but I had to give a lot of tours of this special exhibit, and I became obsessed with his color. And what really obsessed me about it was he always uses a very warm version of a color and a cool version of a color together. And that's very unusual. You're kind of trained as an artist to make most things cool or most things warm. So here you see this very cool and bright green against this olive neutralized warm green. And over here you see colors relative. So you see a cool red, a pink, a hot red, and those colors really, that idea of using closely related colors but warm and cool kind of inspired my colors. And I was fooling around in my sketchbook with actually paint that was left over from painting another painting, came up with this, and I'm showing you how it evolves. This is just a little sketch. This is what I like to call the messy middle as I was working with those shapes and those colors, and this is the final product.
Cool.
It's called Recips Alaquator. It's pretty large. I think I actually painted over another painting when I did this. And you can see, I'm going to show you a close-up of it, a part of it. You can see I've used the warm and cool colors. I've juxtaposed them, both the reds and the greens, the blue. You can see so many different shades of blue right next to each other here. The other thing I like to do is I make my own collage papers. I print them with something called a jelly plate. And I usually print them on tissue, and I use them in little bits and pieces throughout this painting at least. I don't always use it. Here's another one that was inspired by color. Again, I wanted to do something with a lot of warm and cool reds. I was fooling around with my sketchbook. The turquoise blue is a good contrast with warm red, so I incorporated that, and that led to this painting, which I call Grand Canyon. It's quite large. It's 30 inches wide and 40 inches tall. And these are colors that I've been using for quite a while, as some of my friends will know, and some of my art. Again, a close-up to show you all the different shades of warm and cool red. I also like to layer colors on top of each other, kind of like, well, not to put myself in the same league as Diebenkorn and Rothko, but that's, a process of starting with a darker color and then layering a lighter color over it. So the darker color is kind of glowing through. At least that's my aim. I don't always achieve it. And then sometimes I am inspired by nature. So this is a photo. This summer I got into, I spent the summer on the Eastern Shore. I went to a lot of marshes, took a lot of photos, and I came back with the idea that sometimes I go too far in my paintings. I think it's my legal background. I just kind of like have to tie up every loose end. And I think abstract paintings are more effective if you don't do that. So I was trying to push myself to not do that. This is the painting I came up with, a lot different from the ones you've seen so far. But it's still fairly representational. So I wanted to, and again, you'll see the warm and cool greens and yellows, and some reds that are warm and cool. But I wanted to take it further so it wasn't so representational. And I took an old canvas again that I had a painting on it that I'd actually exhibited in the past, but I didn't like anymore. And so I painted over it. Some parts of the old painting are the dark red and this orange thing. And then, this is my first go round, and I'm only showing you 2 passes. There were many passes, believe me. This is the next pass, and this is the final product. And this is acetate 2, so it's quite different from the acetate 1 that you saw. There's all 4 of my paintings. I think I've given you a little bit of introduction to my technique. Some of them have collage, some of them don't. As to the question, how did I find my style? I think when you see these all 4 together, sometimes I surprise myself and say, I guess I do have a style. I seem to like to put horizons in my paintings. I seem to like this kind of, this curved shape everywhere in my paintings. And again, the mix of the warm and cool, closely related colors. I think for aspiring artists, if there are any listening, and they always ask, how do I find my style? You don't find your style finds you. Try as you may. And I think that my acetate paintings were a good illustration of that. I tried to do this other style, but ultimately I had to go back and do my style. It was just something I'm compelled to do.
Thank
So
you.
I'm happy to answer questions later, but that's my
That's really cool. And it's cool to see the progression of your paintings. And I'm reminded of a quote by Jackson Pollock: every artist paints who they are.
Well, and it also makes your work more authentic. And it's what makes your art different, because I can never be Mark Rothko, but I know what I like in a Mark Rothko painting, and I try to incorporate some of that in my paintings. But it's still me and not Mark Rothko. I'm not trying to imitate somebody I can never be.
Yeah, and we still don't know how Rothko made his work, right?
Right.
Okay, Connie, show us your work. Tell us a little bit about it. And Connie, make sure that you get close to your microphone and speak clearly, because we were breaking up a little bit earlier.
Kind of historical, really. So this is a relatively early painting. The one thing I kept from watercolor was that I love to start out with a painting doing wet and wet, making the canvas real wet, and then the color that I put over it really wet, and then work over it. So that's how this started. And I guess partly what inspires me is a mood. I'm trying to catch a certain mood or a feeling when I'm painting. And one of the things that comes up fairly often is just wanting to create sort of an alternative world, a slightly different view of the world. So that's why this is called Other Skies. And it's pretty amorphous. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. So yeah, go on to the next one if you want. Okay, this one, you can see I did a wash there. And it's called Sunset. It's, sort of a feeling at the end of the day. But I've always wanted, on the one hand, to do kind of amorphous, moody things, but also put some structure in there. And it's always been a back and forth. And for this one, I was looking at another painter who is an op artist, so very different from me. And I just took from her this idea of doing blocks of color down there at the bottom. So, and that was the beginning of a series of paintings, which all have stripes in them. One way or other, they have a really soft underground and then stripes either at the bottom, all over, whatever. So that was one approach I take periodically. See the next one. It's called Red for obvious reasons. This is just me being an abstract expressionist, doing the sort of work that they do and just playing with that. And it still started, I think, with a wash in the back, but it quickly turned to just giving some thick paint and strong color, and then a linear areas in the back. There's graphite and there's white paint, just to give it a little bit, of accent. And this one's sort of rare for me, but I kind of like it. It's different. Okay. This one I was being influenced by Gillian Guston, if anybody knows her work. She works with circles and over and over them until she gets the effect she wanted. So I was just playing with circles to some degree and putting bars in there. And the background is really just rolling paint on with the brayer. The blues and grays back there are brayer. And then I collaged on circles and painted on the stripe and tried to get, I think with an awful lot of my work, I try to get the feeling of looking down a bit from above. So this is supposed to get a bit of that feeling. And I've been playing around with that since. I didn't include much, but I'm working on that right now. It's something I'm doing. Okay.
It's like a drone shot.
Yeah. And so this too is, a kind of a looking down. And one of the things I think about is just capturing nature as it's intertwined. There are all those intertwining roots and ecosystems. And this is partly just collage and expression, and partly trying to get at that feeling of nature, just intertwined and moving. Try to get some sort of sense of movement. And I think, okay. I threw this one in here because I don't know where it came from. I'm an intuitive painter. I sort of wait and see what comes to me. And every so often something like this does. And I started out with a layout that I borrowed from an Asian painter, just, sort of general composition. And then, but his was black and white. And then I just started adding color and changed it pretty dramatically. And then thought it really just needed some stripes. So that's what it's got. Anybody who wants to figure out what it is welcome to try. Then I've got one more here. This is another kind of looking down. but with more detail. So I've got lots of little bits of detail in it. The blue was a bit much in the middle, and I thought of changing that. But then I thought there's something kind of awkward about this, about the color, about the almost acid yellow, that says something about what's happening to nature and what our landscapes are like. And I decided I'm just going to leave it looking kind of interesting and awkward for now. Maybe I'll feel to do more later. And I think there's a little bit of Kandinsky influence in there. And it's one of my favorite painters, just the shaping.
Yeah, those are luscious, Connie. Yeah. Linda, you want to show some of your work?
Okay. Yeah, this is in Colombia, in Pereira, where I was 4 years ago. And the title is El Robles, which is a restaurant where I took a photo, and it looked kind of like this. It was a stormy, rainy day. And I don't know if the photograph, I think I put the photograph as well. It might be interesting to look at. Is it possible to look at them both at the same time?
I don't think we got the photograph, Linda.
Oh, really? Oh, I thought I sent it. Anyway, it was from a photograph, and it was a scene with over there where you see the blue to the left. That is a building of some sort, and then there was, I don't know, some kind of a road, and it was muddy, and there was that orange stripe. I don't remember exactly what that was, but anyway, I don't often work from photographs, but I did in this case because the photograph just came up. It was sent to me at random by my computer one day, and I said, "Oh yeah, that might make a really good painting," and it turned out actually quite well. I'm pretty happy with it.
Deep and corny.
Thank you. So yeah, okay. So this is a great big abstract, and it's 48 by 48, and these I did a whole bunch of these for a show I had fairly recently at the Torpedo Factory. It's hard to talk about them because I don't really have a method to my madness. I mean, the last one, yes, it came from a photograph of a landscape, and that inspired me. This, I probably just started from random, and at first it's a lot of fun. And then as you get further on into it, you realize that you have to make it actually hold up by itself. And there it is. I mean, that's fairly, it's a fairly typical abstract from me. Now, this too is one I did for the show, and I think I maybe put it in the show at Touchstone as well. This is a 36 by 36, and here again, it's a typical abstract. I might go back, and it's similar to what Amy was saying. I started out in printmaking, and it became very tedious because every time, well, it was silkscreen printing, and every time you wanted to put in a different color, you had to make a new screen and push all your papers through that screen. That became very tedious, and it became boring, frankly. And then during the summers, I would take an abstract painting class, and oh, that was just so much more fun and easy. If you didn't like something, you just painted over it and you started again. So anyway, this is I spent many years in the class, in the abstract class, and I finally learned how to paint abstractly. Actually, it was very difficult because at first I would revert to a landscape or a still life or an interior or a person. And it took me years to be able to actually divest myself of imagery of some sort, even though the imagery was pretty abstract. But it took me a long time to get to purely abstract. And I would say this is purely abstract. I don't see a landscape or a person or anything. And here again, this is a large 48 by 48 abstract. And I'm very pleased with the way this turned out because I have lights and darks, and then the blue up in the upper right is kind of sets things off. I'm happy with that, and the repetition of shapes, not exactly repetitious, but they evoke each other, like the blue and the yellow and the dark. And there are several roundish shapes that I think add to it. And you might look at this as a landscape with a blue sun, but I don't think you really need to. Here again, abstract, and I feel I succeeded. The lower part is darker, the upper part is lighter. It's got interesting shapes, and yeah, it's I would say successful. Also because of the blue that dominates, the bright blue that dominates. This is a collage, and I often, not always, but I often use collage in the abstract paintings. In this particular case, there was a painting. I started out with a painting and I added a lot of collage. It's probably 90% collage. And I do use papers that I actually purchase, but they're often rice papers and that sort of thing. So I really like doing collage, and often I revert to collage when I'm stuck in the painting. But and now I'm doing collages more for their own sake. And this again is a collage over a painting. What I will do is start with a painting, add collage, and then I go ahead and paint over it again. And I'll just keep on paint collage until I come up with something that is pleasing to me. And this is done. This was an earlier collage. There again, it was over a painting that I just could not resolve. And so I said, okay, well, we'll put collage on here. And I did. And now I'm quite happy with it.
It's interesting to me how each of you kind of start, and you all start in similar ways, and then how you progress through it. What are you thinking about as a painting matures and becomes something else? How do you approach the work once you get started?
I usually start with I pick out my colors. What colors do I want to fool around with? Sometimes if it's an inspiration, like the ones about the marshes, the colors are kind of dictated to me by that theme. But then I just kind of start splashing on color. Then I take usually something that you can make lines with, a crayon or a pencil or whatever, make some lines, maybe some somatic writing that doesn't really say anything, just anything to have lines around. And then I do that process over and over again a couple of times, maybe add some collage. But then I start thinking about the composition, I think. I mean, I've never really analyzed it, but I think that's what I'm thinking, what about the value? Do I have enough value contrast? Are there enough variety of shapes? Usually that's a point when I put in the horizon line for some reason. I don't know. Then I've got to cross the horizon line because it's breaking up the pic. That's kind of, I don't know, that's the process. And as I say, I sometimes overdo it. And instead of leaving it a little wild and free, I tie up too many loose ends and then it becomes dead. Then I go start again and put another layer of color on and do it again. So there's a really building up of a lot of layers. Sometimes I sand things back if I like them. Sometimes I try to preserve one thing that I really like the whole painting. I don't even remember the painting behind me. There's a little shape right there that was there from the start that I like. So I had to preserve that as I'm doing all this. I don't know if that answers your question, how I proceed.
Connie?
Yeah, it's really hard to describe. As I said, I start out with a wet and wet. For a while, I worked with a triad of colors. I used like indanthrene blue, periwinkle blue, and azo gold. So I wouldn't have to think too much about too many colors, but I could afford with that. And yeah, now I use a lot more. But usually, like Amy, my first thought is, what are the colors going to be? And how are they going to mix on the surface when I put on the water? And I just let them move. And sometimes I'll pick them up and I'll turn the canvas in different directions to make them meld a bit. And through the whole thing, I'm asking, what does this painting need? What does it want? It's as though somehow that painting's in charge and I'm supposed to be serving it somehow. And the next step is kind of harder. Like, what do I do next? It's usually figure out another layer of color and then begin to think more about shapes. What shapes am I going to put on top? And I just play for quite a while. And maybe I'll do some collaging. Maybe I'll add some line. Maybe I'll brayer it a bit until I begin to feel that it's getting away. The fun time's over, and now it's time to be more practical and figure out how to give it some composition. And I guess you can see from what I said before, I try lots of different tactics to try to impose some composition and order on it. And sometimes it stays like that, and sometimes it sits around for 6 months and I come back and change it. So yeah, it's never done, really.
Oh, Linda, you want to say
Well,
something?
I often start with a new canvas, and when I'm finishing the day or finishing the session, then I use the palette that's left over, the paint that's left over, to just paint over the canvas any way I please. And then I will continue. In the beginning, it's more intuitive. I just do whatever I please, basically. And then at some point, you need to impose discipline on it and decide, what's good, what's bad, what you can do without. And it's difficult to describe, but sometimes you might like one little piece of it, but you can't let that dictate to you that then the rest of the painting has to revolve around that little piece. You have to be brave enough to go off in a different direction. And if that little piece really isn't working, too bad, you just have to go on. Anyway,
One of my instructors
sometimes,
said you have to be willing to kill your babies.
Yeah, I was thinking the
yeah,
same thing.
yeah, that's true. And I kind of lost my thought, but
Sorry.
that's okay. You have to be willing to look back, consider, and see whether or not it's working, and be willing to go off in a different direction if needs be. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Sometimes it goes very quickly, and there it is. Like I have one in particular right now that I went back and looked at an old picture of it, and it was fine. It was excellent. but I didn't realize that, and I kept on working on it, and now it's a mess, and I'm trying to go back to what I had in the beginning when it really was finished, but I don't know if I'll ever get there. But this can happen. I think Amy mentioned this too. I don't know, Connie, but sometimes you get something and oh yeah, that's fine and it's working, but you don't realize it at the time. Then it might become a background for another painting. But
So
it
can you
happens.
talk about the challenges then of finishing a painting, knowing when it's finished?
Yeah, well, I just did. You don't always know. That is one thing. I went to a class, an abstract class at the torpedo factory for years, and the instructor there is Deanna Schwartzberg. And I would come in. I cannot tell you how many times I came in saying, "Oh, I'm going to finish this particular painting," and she would say, no, just leave it. And I really needed someone to say to me, this is done. You're done. So and now that I'm not in the class anymore, I'm relying on myself. I don't always know. So,
I find you look at a painting, you think, oh, there's just, if I just do this one, add this one little thing or change that block of color or whatever, and then you change one thing and then you've got to change another thing because it's all relative in painting. Everything's relative to the other things in your painting. So you could do that forever. And as I said, my problem is I do it too much. And I think if I actually showed you the full progressions of some of these paintings, they were probably better, like two steps before,
mhm, yeah.
because they had a little bit of more freedom to them. And so I'm trying to get myself to stop to walk away, put the brushes down and walk away before it's too late. Not always easy.
I'm kind of going in the opposite direction with that I used to stop. And I took classes with John Blee for a long time, and he was always saying, stop, when I felt like I was just beginning. And I finally decided, well, I'm just going to keep going for a while and see what happens. And I've decided I really kind of like layering on more and more, and that often I'm not sorry that I do. I mean, there's a stage where I put too much on, it's awkward, and I don't like it. But I often find that if I just keep trying and adding on and putting it aside, and then coming back again, that often does work for me. So now I sometimes do pretty freewheeling things, and sometimes, much more, control layer by layer as I go.
I've tried to get myself to slow down
Yeah, me too.
and actually work for fewer hours on a painting. You get in the groove and you're in the flow and you just keep going. But I try to, almost set a timer and say, okay, I've worked enough on this painting, set it aside for a while to make sure I don't overwork it.
Yeah, I find often having more than one painting around that you're working on helps too. So when you're beginning to really overwork one, you just walk away from it and
Right.
set feet on the ground.
Yeah, I tend to get in the zone when I'm at my studio and I really get lost in whatever I'm doing. So, are there particular tools or methods? I know you're all acrylic painters, mediums you use. I know, Connie, you mentioned using a brayer. I'm not sure everybody knows what a brayer is, but you could tell us.
It's just it's made of rubber. It's a rubber roller. People use it in printmaking to roll it over prints, but you can just use paint too with it. I used a few different things actually. Um, as I've said, I collage probably more than you could see from those paintings, and I'll use rice paper. I recently collected sycamore bark, and I've got a few paintings that have sycamore bark on them, although it's really tricky to work with. You have to wet it and then hold it down for a while under a book to flatten it and stuff. But I like the effect, so I've been playing with that. Um, I will, sometimes just etch into things. I like using something pointed and working in with that. And I use mediums. I really like fiber paste to get some texture, and I'll just use I'll use gloss medium a lot if I want one part of the painting to be brighter, or when the whole thing seems dull, and just going over it with gloss medium really seems to work. Um, and I don't know, I just, I love playing with things. And I think I mentioned I was really interested in this water media group that was writing, when I first started painting. And they just liked experimenting with all the water media, whether they would combine watercolor and acrylic and Keishu and whatever they wanted to use really. And I like doing that, just combining a few mediums, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I've tried gouache a bit recently, and I like the sort of matte finish against the acrylic brightness.
I use brushes. I use these things called color shapers, which are sort of the shape of a brush, but they're silicone, and they usually come to a sharp point, and you can push the paint around. And sometimes I'll try to paint just with that, so I'm not so controlled with my movements. I use one of my favorite tools is hotel keys, those plastic. The plastic hotel keys that are kind of like credit cards. I can use it to spread the paint. I can use it to incise into the paint. There's a number. I use kitchen tools. I use, as I said, I collage. I do stencils. I like putting letters sometimes in my art. I don't think anything I showed today did that, but I use stencils of letters. I use branches. I use pencils. I use oil pastels. I use watercolor pencils, which you have to glaze over to fix before you put the acrylics over it. And in terms of mediums, I like to, and in fact, the painting behind me, it's sort of had, you can't really tell online, but I have alternated gloss medium and matte medium in different shapes. So it gives it an even a bit more depth, and more resonance, I think, on the surface. That's just a few of the things that I think I use.
And you can see some harder lines in your work, Amy.
Oh,
What do you?
yes. I use masking tape a lot. Thank you for
Ah,
reminding me. I meant to mention this, not just to make the hard edges, or sometimes I just use a squeegee kind of tool. I mean, the hardware store is really an art supply store, and
yeah.
just to make those edges. But when I don't just use the masking tape to mask off a place and then make a hard edge, I sometimes just rip it up into random shapes and put it on, and it if I've put down one color and then I paint over it with another color, then I take the tape off and you've got the
Ah, yeah.
spots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I use all sorts of different widths of masking tape.
Linda, do you have tools or materials or
Well,
mediums that you like
um,
to use?
I pretty much, as Amy described, I use a lot of those same things. And I also use the oil pastels. But she gave me a lot of good ideas too. So, and I have several tools that are, I guess they're vinyl at the end, and they kind of make stripes and so on and so forth, which those are, there's a lot, as Amy described, there is, there's no end to what you can use.
Everything's an art tool if you start
Yeah.
looking at it that way. Skewers too, wooden skewers too, are great.
So I want to ask the audience again if you have any questions. If you could ask them now verbally, or you could put them in the Q&A. I think
We
we
do have
have.
a question from the chat for Amy. There's a question about your painting in the background and if it is indeed enormous. Um,
It's 30 inches high and 40 inches wide. It's one of my bigger paintings. I like painting big, but as I get older, it's a little bit more taxing to move around the big canvases and lift them and carry them and so forth. But I really enjoy painting big.
Do you ever paint on anything other than canvas, like wood or glass or aluminum?
I paint on cradle boards, which are plywood. I paint a lot on those because I like the fact that they don't give when you're incising into something or sanding into something. Got an example there, McCain? Is that what you're a demonstration of a cradle board? Yeah,
They look like this from the
yeah,
front and then from the back.
right.
That's almost exclusively what I paint on. So
And
one
paper.
of my friends, sorry, go ahead.
And paper. I paint on 300-pound watercolor paper and then mount it on a cradle board.
I love the way paper absorbs the color. So one of my clever friends told me she was going to be on this talk, and she asked me the question, isn't all art abstract? So I was trying to think of some art that wasn't abstract.
I would say yes to that question, although you might argue photorealism is not abstract, but everything is abstract. And one of the reasons I like to paint abstract is like you can take a photo now. You don't need a painting to know how things really look. So, um, do something different. But yes, it's all representation. It's all a symbol, a representation of reality. It's not reality.
There's a
Um,
question, do any of you stretch your own canvases ever?
I used to, but good quality canvas is readily available at a price that you can't match if you do it yourself. So the answer now is, for me, I don't stretch my own, although I just recently made cradle boards, which I think that did save me money by going to Home Depot, getting the plywood and getting the background, and they turned out pretty well. So I'm going to be using those for collages.
Life is
Could
too
you,
short to stretch my own canvas. I want to get to the painting.
Yeah, yeah.
Although I did see, I don't know if you've seen this movie. It's called The Price of Everything. It's about contemporary art scene. And Larry Poons, who's not as well known as he should be, he hangs huge raw canvas, like a huge roll of it, completely unrolled all around his barn studio, paints it everywhere, and then decides which portion of it is going to be his painting. So that does give you that freedom to stretch your own canvas.
Mm-hmm.
and then he cuts it up?
Yeah.
Um, could you talk about like people who inspire you or things that inspire you?
I, I was sort of back on the it's all art abstract and it overlaps. I mean, I guess all art is abstract if you think of it in terms of patterning, having some sort of pattern of color and shape and so on underlying it. But if you think of abstraction as also being kind of working from the subconscious and just letting come up whatever wants to come up, which is kind of what a lot of the abstract expressionists thought. You think of Pollock or somebody like that. That was really a big piece of how they proceeded. And in that case, I think abstraction is kind of special because you do have to just say, okay, I'm going to hand over to my intuition at some point. I am, even though this seems kind of odd, I'm going to do it because it seems to be called for, and there's some part of me that really wants to do it, and I can always cover it up if need be. So yeah, the abstract expressionists really affect me, but I like Peebo. I've recently been looking at somebody called Rick Lowe, who does really interesting work they're sort of like cityscapes seen from above, but very abstract. I've been really interested in Diebenkorn, um, a whole, there's just a host of people. Jillian actually too, just because her approach it seems like it shouldn't work and it works beautifully as she paints over part of a circle and then refines it and just keeps working, kind of like archaeology. And I guess also as an anthropologist, and I always like the idea of, other worlds, other ways of seeing things. And I love Pueblo pottery. Yeah, I like an awful lot of things from other cultures as well.
Amy?
Well, I mentioned, as I say, I fancy myself a colorist. So I mentioned Rothko and Diebenkorn and the way they layer colors and make them vibrate. I love Joan Mitchell in terms of abstract art, also because of her colors and the energy in her marks. But surprisingly, I mentioned that I was an art history major. Some artists you may not think of that I get inspired by primarily because of the colors are Van Gogh. He's an amazing colorist, Titian, and of course I mentioned Tamayo before.
Linda, do you?
Well, I probably am going to repeat what Connie and Amy said. I'm also inspired by probably the same people. And another thing I could add is I often, I don't do much on Instagram, but I look. And I always see things there that I just love. And I often say, oh, I'm going to paint like that. Well, even if I give permission to try to copy someone, I can't. It just doesn't turn out like that. And that's okay. But I use Instagram for inspiration. You will see artists there that are fantastic, just beautiful, and people I don't really know, but I see over and over again there. But anyway.
Abby, any more questions?
We don't have any more questions at this time.
Okay. Anything else that you would like to say, talk about, ask each other questions?
Well, Amy, I really enjoyed your talk. You gave me a lot of ideas, and I love your work.
Thank you. Well, Linda, I'm a member of Touchstone because I took that class you've been taking for 30 years once.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that goes to show you.
And met, some Touchstone members. So it's, I would say, I think it's really hard to paint a good abstract painting. In some ways,
Yeah.
it's much more easy to paint a representational painting. At least you have some guideposts along the way of what you're trying to do. And I really, this isn't really a question. I just thought I'd add this for the audience. I really had a hard time getting started. And also, by the time I started doing abstract, I knew what a good painting was. I knew the rules of composition and value, et cetera, that you learn when you start taking these classes. But I didn't know how to use acrylics. Oh, I know. This is a good question. Why acrylics? Why not oil or some other medium? But I had to find a class where instead of most of the introductory acrylics classes were, basic painting classes. So it was hard for me to find a class that sort of started at my level of understanding how to paint, but taught me basic things about acrylics. So why do you guys paint with acrylics?
Well, for me, it is because when I started painting a long time ago, acrylics were the preferred method of painting. Back in college, yes, we did use oils, but by the time I got to graduate school, acrylics were more favored. And when I tried to go back to oil painting a couple of times, there was no advantage to it. It was a lot more expensive, and it was a lot harder to get the effects that you wanted. And acrylics, I probably came in pretty much on the beginning of acrylics, or when acrylics were becoming commonplace. But over the years, they've developed, very well, and so it's the preferred medium now. I think, although some people still paint in oils. That's fine.
Connie?
Yeah, I like that you can do almost anything with acrylics. It can be thick, it can be thin, it can be textured. You can paint over whatever you've done and start again. So it's just so flexible. And I just didn't want to mess with oils or sadly encaustic. I love encaustic, but I'm prone to allergies and asthma. And those mediums seem a little more risky than acrylics, which also seems to be a pretty safe one to work with.
Did y'all ever watch Bob Ross?
Yes, of course.
No.
Growing up, yeah.
I mean, I watch Bob Ross all the time. He only works in oils, but it's really fascinating what he can do with oils and how he's worked out the brushes, how he's worked out the thick and thin, how he's worked out the liquid white. He always starts with liquid, he starts with a coat of wet, kind of like an underlayment, either white or black, and then works over it. So when he puts a new color on top, it automatically dulls the color or softens the color or brightens the color. It's really an interesting technique.
We do
I
have two questions. One is, how do you see your art evolving over the next years?
Well, I can answer that now. I'm going to work exclusively in collage. Maybe. Yeah, of course, if I don't really like doing that, I can always add the paint and the line. But that's what I'm working for in for my next solo show should be in about 3 years. So I'm starting to work exclusively in collage now, but we'll see.
I have a solo show coming in October at Touchstone. Begins in late September and goes into October. And I have a lot of work to do between now and then. But I'm kind of on two paths at the same time. I want to do more of the marshes, but I just got this weird idea. I'm not sure it's going to play out, but I've done a couple of them where I'm doing something that they tell you never to do when you take your art classes, which is divide the canvas or the panel in half and put one color on one and one color on the other, and go back into it with all my little squiggles and layering and all that stuff. But um, try to get your eye off that and have the fact that it's been divided in half, and also put words on it, because I feel like words have become, and I don't usually do political art. I'm a very political person actually, but my art doesn't reflect that necessarily. But everything's so topsy-turvy right now. Black is white, up is down. And so these are going to be a series of what I'm thinking in my mind are reversible paintings. You can flip them over any way you want. I might have words on them that relate to each other on the different sides. So I'm going to see if that works, but that's what I'm playing with right now.
Cool.
Well, right now, I've just started working with this, something that's more like cityscape seen from above. And I'm going to use a lot of stenciling with that. And, less brushwork, more, different bits of equipment to see what I can get. But at the same time, I think I'm also going to go back to just playing a little bit more with backgrounds and with glazing. I mean, one of the wonderful things about acrylic is you can glaze layer over layer and you get depth and you get the colors sort of changing. And sometimes they become luminous. And I'd like to experiment with that some more.
Abby, do you have one more question?
We do, and it's a good one to kind of end on. What extent is the viewer a part of the artistic process for each of you? And that's the question, but there's a compliment of how this talk was really inspiring, and thank you all.
I this is going to sound weird, but like the only viewer that matters to me when I'm painting is me. And I'm always asking myself, would I want that on my wall? Would I want to look at that for a long time? And if the answer is no, I keep working on it. Um, and so I wonder, I have a friend who's listening, and I don't know if she was the source of this question, but she asked me something when she called to say she was going to be on in the audience. She said, when I know the background and the thought process of your abstract paintings, they mean so much more to me. And shouldn't you be sharing more of that with the viewer? Um, and wouldn't it make it a richer experience for them? And, one of my paintings you might have seen is called Res Ipsa Loquitur, which is a legal term which means the thing speaks for itself. And that's I don't necessarily like to explain my art to people. I want them, at least not initially, I want them to engage with the painting and just have an emotional reaction to it.
Yeah, I would say a very similar thing. I really don't paint with the object of, say, getting into a show or selling the piece. I really do it to please myself. And at this point in time, I know what this probably goes against what I already said. I know if it's good or bad, and I can make that judgment, although not always, but in general, I paint for myself.
Connie, do you want to say something about that?
Pretty much the same. I think when you're in front of the canvas, it's between you and the canvas or, whatever you're working on. And I guess I think as a viewer, just, I said mood kind of matters to me. And I think, can I convey that sort of mood to a viewer? That I am sometimes thinking. But I'm always assuming that whoever's looking at it is going to come to their own interpretation and look at what parts they like. And when I talk to people about my paintings, they see such different things than I do. That's just how it has to be.
Well, we're going to close on that. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Connie, Amy, and Linda, and everybody in the audience. And please come see us at Touchstone. You have our hours, Wednesday through Sunday, 12 to 5. Every month we have a new show, and we also have solo shows by our artists, so you can see an artist's work in more depth. touchstonegallery.com. And check back for our 50th anniversary activities. Thanks for joining us, and we'll have another one at some point.